Midnight in the Iron Wreath pack house. Javance moves through shadows like she belongs to them, her cleaning cloth clutched in scarred hands. She's learned to be invisible. It's safer that way, especially when Alpha Vane Blackwood prowls the halls with those storm-gray eyes that see too much and too little all at once. Tonight, her shoulder is screaming. The old wound never fully healed, and the winter cold makes it worse. She slips into the kitchen, thinking she's alone, and tries to work the knot free. The fabric of her shirt slides down, exposing the twisted landscape of scar tissue she normally keeps hidden. "You're hurt." The voice turns her blood to ice. Vane stands in the doorway, backlit and massive, his alpha presence filling the room like smoke. He's looking at her scars with an expression she can't read, fury, maybe, or disgust. He crosses to her in 3 strides. "Who did this to you?" J's voice is locked in her throat, same as always. But her eyes speak volumes. "Please don't ask. Please don't make me tell you." Vane's jaw tightens. "I will find them, and I will make them pay." What truth is Ja hiding behind her silence? And what will happen when the alpha hunting for her attacker discovers he's been chasing his own shadow? Like this video and hit the subscribe button to uncover the secret that could destroy them both or forge them into something unbreakable. Now let's get straight into it. Ja learned early that silence was a kind of armor. Not the silence of choosing when to speak, but the thick, suffocating kind that wrapped around her throat 3 years ago and never quite let go. She woke before dawn, same as always. The pack house stirred with the rhythms of wolves who didn't notice her, feet padding down hallways, showers running, the clatter of breakfast preparations beginning in the vast kitchen below. Ja dressed in the dark, pulling on clothes that had been washed so many times they'd gone soft and colorless. Gray like smoke, like shadows. Her father had stopped asking her to sit at the Beta's table 2 years ago. It was easier this way, she'd told him through the sign language he'd painstakingly learned for her. Easier to blend into the walls, to be useful without being seen. He'd looked at her with those sad, knowing eyes and hadn't argued. He understood what she was doing, even if he hated it. Protecting Vane meant staying invisible. It meant scrubbing floors he'd walk across without seeing her, washing linens he'd sleep on without knowing her hands had touched them, preparing meals he'd eat while she stood in the corner with the other kitchen staff, head down, breath quiet. It meant watching him from the edges of rooms and hating how beautiful he was in his controlled fury. Alpha Vane Blackwood was all sharp edges and rigid discipline. He moved through the pack house like winter itself, cold, unyielding, necessary. His dark hair was always perfectly cut, his clothes always immaculate, his expression carefully neutral except for those rare moments when his storm-gray eyes flashed with something deeper. Anger, maybe, or fear wearing an anger mask. Ja knew what fear looked like on an alpha. She'd seen it up close, felt it in the trembling of massive claws as they'd tried so hard not to kill her. She pushed the memory down, same as always, and headed for the kitchen. The morning routine was familiar enough to be meditative. She peeled potatoes while the head cook, Marla, directed the organized chaos of feeding 70 pack members. The other kitchen staff chattered around her, their voices washing over her like river current. They'd stopped expecting her to respond years ago. "Did you hear? The Alpha's been asking questions again." This from Jenna, one of the younger servers, her voice pitched low with gossip. Ja's hands stilled for just a fraction of a second before resuming their work. "About that night," another voice, male this time, Owen, who worked the morning prep shift. "What else would it be about? Marla, didn't he corner you yesterday after the evening meal?" The head cook grunted, her knife work never slowing as she broke down a side of venison. "Asked me if I remembered anyone being brought to the healing wards that night. Wanted to know if there were records." Ja's heart hammered against her ribs. She focused on the potato in her hands, on the rhythmic motion of the peeler, on keeping her breathing even. "What'd you tell him?" "The truth, that Beta Vance sealed those records himself, and I wasn't about to go against a direct order from the second in command." Marla's tone suggested the conversation had ended badly. Alpha didn't like that answer much. No, he wouldn't have. Vane couldn't stand locked doors, especially ones inside his own pack house, inside his own mind. She had watched his frustration building over the past week like pressure behind a dam. He'd cornered her twice more since that first night in the kitchen, his questions careful but insistent. Who hurt you? When did it happen? Why won't you tell me? Each time, she'd looked at him with wide eyes and shaken her head, escaping as soon as his attention shifted. But she could feel the cracks forming in her carefully constructed invisibility. Vane was looking at her now, really looking, and once an alpha decided to see you, there was nowhere left to hide. I heard he's going through the patrol logs from that week, Jenna continued, oblivious to the way his knuckles had gone white around the peeler, trying to figure out if any rogues escaped that he didn't account for. Because that was the story everyone believed. The Unbroken King had gone feral, slaughtered the intruders, saved the pack. No one talked about the cost. No one asked about the blood under his claws that hadn't belonged to rogues. No one except Vane himself, who was finally starting to ask the questions she had dreaded for 3 years. She finished the potatoes in mechanical silence and moved to the next task, then the next. The morning bled into afternoon. She cleaned the Alpha's office while he was in pack meetings, moving around his desk like a ghost, careful not to disturb the papers he'd left scattered across the dark wood. Investigation notes, she realized. Names, timelines, a map of the pack house with red marks where the bodies had been found. Her hands trembled as she dusted around them. You're afraid of me. Je spun, the dusting cloth falling from her fingers. Vane stood in the doorway, so still she hadn't heard him approach. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read, something harder than curiosity, softer than anger. She shook her head quickly, signing without thinking. No, Alpha. His eyes tracked the movement of her hands, but she knew he didn't understand the signs. No one did except her father and the pack healer. She'd made sure of that. You flinch every time I'm near you, Vane continued, stepping into the office. She fought the urge to back away. You won't speak to me. You hide in corners and shadows. If that's not fear, what is it? Guilt, she wanted to say. Grief, love, terror that you'll remember and it will destroy you. Instead, she bent to retrieve the fallen cloth, using the motion to break eye contact. I spoke with your father today. Vane's voice had gone quieter, which somehow made it more dangerous. He won't tell me what happened to you, says it's not his story to share. His fingers clenched in the fabric. But he did tell me one thing. Vane moved closer, and Je could smell pine and cold air clinging to him. He'd been running the borders, burning off frustration in the forest. He said the person who hurt you is someone I should forgive. That vengeance would only make things worse. Her eyes snapped up to meet his, horror blooming in her chest. What was her father thinking? Vane's jaw tightened. Which tells me it's someone in this pack. Someone I know, someone I might. He stopped, the muscle in his cheek twitching. Someone I trust. Je shook her head frantically, trying to communicate what words couldn't. Stop. Please stop looking. Please stop digging. Please. I will find them, Vane said, and the alpha command in his voice made her wolf whimper and bow. I will find whoever put their claws in you, and I will make them answer for it. On my blood, Je, on the iron crown I wear, I will not let this stand. He was so close now she could see the silver flecks in his gray eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his body. Could remember how that heat had felt when it was fury incarnate, when those eyes had been empty of everything human. Tell me who it was, he said, almost gently. Let me protect you the way I should have 3 years ago. And there it was. The thing he'd been circling around, the shape of the memory he couldn't quite grasp. 3 years ago, the night that had broken them both in different ways. She opened her mouth, her voice a rusted hinge that hadn't been oiled in years. Nothing came out but a soft, wounded sound. Vane's expression shifted into something raw. I'm sorry, I shouldn't push, He stepped back, giving her space she desperately needed. Your pack, you're my pack, and someone hurt you badly enough that you can't even speak about it. That's not something I can ignore. He turned toward his desk, his shoulders rigid with frustration. I'll find the truth eventually. I always do. That was what she was afraid of. She fled the office before he could see the tears starting to form, before her carefully maintained silence shattered into pieces. She made it to the kitchen, to her corner by the industrial sinks, before the weight of it crushed down on her shoulders like stone. 3 years of invisible existence, and Vane Blackwood was finally learning to see in the dark. The healer's den smelled like sage and sterile panic. Vane could taste both on the air as he stepped through the doorway, watching Dr. Kess's hands still over the mortar she'd been grinding. The older woman had been with the Iron Wreath Pack for 20 years, had set broken bones and delivered pups, and kept secrets that weren't hers to tell. Her loyalty to the pack was absolute. Which was exactly why Vane knew she'd crack before his beta would. Alpha, Kess straightened, her spine rigid with the kind of tension that came from anticipating an unpleasant conversation. I wasn't expecting you. No one ever is. Vane closed the door behind him with deliberate care. Not a slam, not a threat, just the quiet click of a lock that said, "We're going to talk, and you're going to answer." I need to see the medical records from 3 years ago, the night of the feral incident. Kess's weathered face went carefully blank. Alpha, those records were. Sealed by Beta Vance. Yes, I've heard. Vane moved deeper into the den, his eyes cataloging the neat rows of jars and bottles, the examination table with its sterile covering, the locked cabinet where she kept the controlled substances. And the files. I'm unsealing them. You'd need to speak with the Beta about that. It was his order. I'm speaking with you. Vane turned to face her fully, letting just enough alpha pressure leak into his voice to make her wolf take notice. Someone was badly injured that night. Injured badly enough that my Beta felt the need to bury the evidence. I want to know who. Kess's throat worked as she swallowed. Her fingers had gone white around the pestle. With respect, Alpha, if Beta Vance sealed those records, he had good reason. The only good reason to hide an injury from your Alpha is if the Alpha was the one who caused it. The words tasted like ash. Vane had been circling this conclusion for days, trying to find another explanation, any other possibility. But the math was simple. Someone had been hurt badly during his feral state. Someone his Beta was protecting. Someone who still lived in his pack house, still carried scars, still flinched at shadows. Someone who looked at him like he was a monster. Kess set down the mortar with trembling hands. You need to speak with Beta Vance. I'm speaking with you, Vane repeated, softer this time. Kess, please, I need to know what I did. The healer closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were bright with something that looked like sorrow. There was one injury that night that didn't come from the rogues. Extensive claw damage, massive blood loss, trauma to the shoulder and neck. She drew a shaking breath. I've never seen anyone survive wounds like that. Shouldn't have been possible. Vane's stomach turned to ice. Who? The Beta sealed the records for your protection, Alpha. And hers. Hers, the pronoun hit him like a physical blow. Not just someone. A woman. A girl. His mind immediately conjured just scars, the way they'd felt under his fingers, raised and vicious and old. 3 years old. Tell me it wasn't her. His voice came out strangled. Tell me I didn't. You need to speak with Beta Vance. Kess's tone had gone firm, almost desperate. This isn't my story to tell, and I've already said too much. But Alpha, she met his eyes, and the compassion there made him want to break something. Whatever you're imagining, whatever guilt you're carrying, it's more complicated than you think. Talk to the Beta, please. Vane left the healing den with his hands shaking and his wolf clawing at the inside of his chest. The pack house suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in like a cage. He needed air, needed space, needed to find his Beta and force the truth out of him even if it meant. He stopped dead in the main corridor. Je was at the entrance, a weathered pack slung over her shoulder, dressed for travel. Her father stood before her, his broad frame blocking her path, his expression torn between understanding and refusal. They were signing to each other in rapid, frustrated gestures, a silent argument that no one else in the pack house could follow. Vane crossed the distance between them in long strides, his alpha instincts screaming danger, threat, protect. Where do you think you're going? Both Vances froze. Zhe's eyes went wide, caught, and her father's jaw tightened. "She's visiting her aunt in the Silver Creek Pack," Beta Vance said smoothly, too smoothly. "Just for a few days." Bullshit. Vane could smell the lie, could see it in the way Zhe's fingers clutched the strap of her pack like a lifeline. "Try again." "Alpha. Is she running?" Vane addressed the question to his beta, but kept his eyes locked on Zhe, watching the color drain from her face. "Is she leaving the territory because she's afraid someone here will hurt her again?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Zhe was shaking her head frantically, signing something that Vane couldn't read, but that made her father's expression crack into something anguished. "She's not running from danger," the beta said quietly. "She's running from you." The words landed like a blade between his ribs. "From me." "You've been," Vance struggled for words, glancing at his daughter with something close to desperation. "Your investigation, the questions. You're getting too close to things that should stay buried, and it's tearing her apart." Vane looked at Zhe, really looked, and saw the truth written in every line of her body. The exhaustion, the fear, the weight of something too heavy for one person to carry alone. She wasn't afraid of some phantom attacker lurking in the pack house. She was afraid of what would happen when he finally remembered. "No," the word came out harder than he intended. "You're not leaving." Zhe's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger if it weren't drowned in panic. She signed something sharp and quick to her father. "She says you can't keep her here against her will," Vance translated, though his tone suggested he didn't agree with the sentiment. "Watch me." Vane moved closer, and Zhe backed up instinctively until her shoulders hit the wall. He braced his hands on either side of her head, caging her in, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Someone in this pack hurt you. Hurt you badly enough that my beta sealed the medical records, badly enough that you'd rather flee than face them. You really think I'm going to let you run off where I can't protect you?" "From myself," his mind whispered. "You're protecting her from yourself." Zhe was breathing hard, her chest rising and falling with barely controlled fear. But she didn't look away. For the first time since that night in the kitchen, she held his gaze, and Vane saw something in those dark eyes that made his breath catch. Not fear. Recognition. The kind of bone-deep knowing that came from seeing someone at their absolute worst and surviving it. She raised one trembling hand and pressed it flat against his chest, right over his heart. The gesture was achingly familiar, though Vane couldn't say why. Then she shook her head, slowly, deliberately. "No." "No, you won't leave," Vane asked. "Or no, I'm wrong about something." Zhe's hand fell away. She looked to her father with an expression that pleaded for rescue, but the beta was watching them both with a resignation that spoke of inevitability. "If she stays, I'm assigning myself as her personal guard," Vane said, the decision crystallizing even as he spoke it. "Until I find who did this, she doesn't go anywhere unprotected." "Alpha, that's not necessary." "It wasn't a request, Beta." Vane stepped back, giving just space to breathe but not space to run. "She's clearly terrified, and someone in this pack is a threat to her safety. I'm not letting her out of my sight until this is resolved." The irony of it would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. The thing Zhe was most afraid of was him, and he just sentenced them both to constant proximity. But Vane couldn't let her leave. Not now. Not when he was so close to understanding the shape of the nightmare that had been haunting him for 3 years. Not when every instinct he possessed was screaming that if he let her walk out that door, he'd lose something irreplaceable. Zhe made a soft, broken sound, half sob, half laugh, and let her pack slide from her shoulder to the floor. The resignation in the gesture cut deeper than any words could have. "Smart girl," Vane said, even as his chest tightened with something that felt uncomfortably like shame. "You start tomorrow, 6 a.m. Don't make me come find you." He walked away before she could see the cracks forming in his composure, before his beta could argue, before the weight of what he was doing crushed him completely. Behind him, he heard Vance murmuring soft comfort to his daughter in a language Vane didn't speak. The ghost he was hunting wore his own face, and he'd just locked himself in a room with the only witness. The first morning, Vane expected resistance. He found Zhe in the kitchen at 5:45, already dressed, her hair braided back from her face, eyes shadowed with sleeplessness. She looked at him with the expression of someone walking toward an execution, then gathered her cleaning supplies and waited. "You don't have to bring those," Vane said, nodding toward the bucket and rags. Zhe's fingers moved in quick gestures he didn't understand, but her meaning was clear enough from context. "This is my job." "Not today. I need you with me while I review territory reports." It was a lie, of course. He had no reports that required her presence, but he couldn't very well protect her if she was scrubbing floors in distant wings of the pack house. She followed him to his office in silence, her footsteps whisper-soft on the hardwood. Vane positioned a chair near the window, close enough to keep her in his peripheral vision, far enough to not feel like imprisonment. Zhe sat with the rigid posture of prey, trying not to draw a predator's attention. 3 hours later, Vane noticed her rubbing her left shoulder. The movement was subtle, barely there, but his wolf caught it with the instinct of something that had been trained to notice weakness. Zhe's fingers worked at the muscle through her thin sweater, her face carefully neutral even as her jaw tightened against obvious pain. The temperature had dropped overnight, the first real cold snap of approaching winter. Vane made a note on the patrol schedule he wasn't really reading, then stood. Zhe's head snapped up, her whole body tensing. But Vane walked past her without a word, left the office, and returned 10 minutes later with a heating pad from the medical supplies. He set it on the small table beside her chair. "For your shoulder." Zhe stared at the heating pad like it might bite her. "The cold makes old injuries worse," Vane said, returning to his desk. "Use it or don't, but stop suffering in silence when there's an easy solution." He didn't look at her directly, but he felt the weight of her gaze on him, heard the soft rustle as she slowly, carefully, reached for the heating pad and plugged it in. The small sound of relief she made when the warmth touched her shoulder was almost inaudible. Almost. The second day, Vane watched her struggle to lift a crate of preserved goods during inventory check. She'd angled her body to favor her right side, trying to compensate for the weakness in her left shoulder. The other kitchen workers didn't notice, or didn't care enough to help. Vane noticed. "Put that down," he said from the doorway. Zhe nearly dropped the crate in surprise. She set it down carefully, her expression guilty, like she'd been caught doing something wrong. Vane crossed to where she stood and picked up the crate with one hand. "Where does this go?" Her fingers moved. "Storage room, third shelf." He carried it himself, ignoring the curious looks from the kitchen staff. When he returned, he found Marla directing Zhe toward another heavy load. "She's reassigned," Vane said flatly. "Light duties only. If something's too heavy for one person to lift comfortably, someone else does it." Marla's eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Alpha, we're short-staffed as it is." "Then hire more staff. She's not lifting anything that aggravates that shoulder." "Understood." The head cook nodded slowly, her sharp eyes darting between Vane and Zhe with barely concealed speculation. Vane could practically hear the gossip starting before he'd even left the room. By the fourth day, Vane had started learning Zhe's patterns. The way she moved through spaces with practiced efficiency, never taking the direct route if it meant crossing paths with too many pack members. The way her fingers would twitch with signs even when no one was watching, as if she was having conversations with herself that no one else could hear. The way she startled at sudden movements, dropped pans, slammed doors, raised voices, but never, strangely, at his presence. He tested it on the 5th day, purely by accident. He'd been standing in the corridor outside the library, reviewing a message on his phone, when Zhe rounded the corner. She was looking down at a book in her hands, completely absorbed, and walked within 3 feet of him before she sensed him there. She looked up, their eyes met, and she didn't flinch. The moment stretched, strange and electric, before Zhe seemed to remember herself and dropped her gaze. But Vane had seen it, that split second where she'd simply been in his presence without fear. "What are you reading?" he asked, more to keep her there than from genuine curiosity. Zhe held up the book, a battered copy of folklore and mythology, the pages soft with age and repeated handling. "Researching something." She shook her head, Then her fingers moved in gestures that were becoming familiar even if he couldn't interpret them. Something about the rhythm of her hands was almost like speech, the pauses for commas, the sharp stops for periods, the questioning lift at the end of sentences. "I wish I understood what you're saying," Vane said quietly. Zha's hands stilled. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite name, then slowly, deliberately, she opened her palm and pressed it over her heart. Then she pointed at him. "I see you," the gesture seemed to say. "I know you." The intimacy of it stole his breath. Before he could respond, Zha had slipped past him and disappeared down the corridor, leaving Vane standing alone with the ghost of her hand, gesture burned into his mind. The 7th day brought freezing rain that turned the pack grounds into a nightmare of ice and slush. Vane was returning from border patrol when he found Zha in one of the storage sheds, shivering as she inventoried supplies. The small space had no heat, and her lips had gone faintly blue. "What are you doing out here?" Vane demanded. Zha's cold fingers fumbled through an explanation he couldn't read. "Inside, now." He didn't wait for compliance, just took her elbow and guided her back toward the pack house. Her skin was ice through the thin fabric of her sleeve. "You should have told someone it was too cold." She gave him a look that clearly said, "Who would I tell? Who would listen?" The question haunted him the rest of the day. How long had she been invisible? How many people had looked through her rather than at her? He found himself watching the pack dynamics with new eyes, seeing the way conversations flowed around her like water around stone, the way she'd perfected the art of taking up no space. That night, Vane added 2 portable heaters to the storage shed before Zhu arrived for work the next morning. He didn't mention it. She didn't thank him. But when he checked on her an hour later, she was working in her coat unbuttoned, her cheeks pink with warmth instead of cold, and something in his chest eased. The cracks were forming. Small fissures in the armor he'd built around himself, the ruthless discipline that said an alpha couldn't be soft, couldn't notice the small hurts, couldn't care about one damaged girl who wouldn't even speak to him. But Vane was noticing, and caring, and the more time he spent with Zha, the more he saw not just the scars she carried, but the quiet strength that kept her moving through each day despite them. The way she anticipated needs before they were spoken. The way she gentled nervous pack members with just her presence. The way she'd somehow learned to communicate entire worlds through nothing but hand gestures and expressive eyes. She was extraordinary, and he'd been too blind to see it. On the 9th day, Vane caught her signing to herself again while she organized his bookshelf. He'd been pretending to work, but really he'd been watching the fluid poetry of her hands, trying to decode meaning from movement. "Will you teach me?" The question emerged before he'd fully decided to ask it. Zha turned, confusion clear on her face. "The signing, will you teach me your language?" Vane set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "I'm tired of not understanding you." Something shifted in Zha's expression, surprise bleeding into something softer, something almost like hope. Then fear crashed over it like a wave, drowning the light before it could fully form. She shook her head, backed away, fled the office like he'd threatened her instead of offered her a bridge. Vane sat alone in the silence she left behind and wondered what terrified her more. The beast who'd given her those scars, or the man who was trying so desperately to make amends for sins he couldn't remember committing. He was beginning to suspect it was the latter. And that realization terrified him more than any feral state ever could. The nightmare came on the 10th night, like a fever breaking. Vane was running through the pack house, but the walls were wrong, stretched and distorted, bleeding shadows that moved with their own malicious intent. His hands were massive, clawed, dripping with something dark and wet. The copper tang of blood filled his mouth, his nose, his lungs until he was drowning in it. Screaming. Someone was screaming, high and terrified and dying. He tried to stop, tried to pull back the killing instinct that drove him forward like a puppet on strings, but his body wouldn't obey. The wolf was in control, and the wolf only understood threats and elimination and the primal need to destroy. Then music. A voice, soft and trembling, cutting through the red haze like starlight through storm clouds. not words. A melody. Something ancient and wordless, the kind of song that mothers sang to frightened children, that pack members hummed during long winter nights when the darkness felt too heavy. The wolf slowed, turned, and there. Small, so impossibly small against his massive frame. Dark eyes wide with terror but holding steady, meeting his gaze even as blood bloomed across pale fabric like roses in snow. She was singing, her voice cracking with pain but never stopping, never giving up, and her hand. Her hand was reaching for his face. "Come back," she whispered between verses. "I know you're still in there, come back." Vane woke with a gasp that tore from his chest like a physical wound. His sheets were soaked with sweat, twisted around his legs like restraints. His hands were outstretched, reaching for something that wasn't there, fingers curved around empty air where a small face should have been. The memory was already fragmenting, details slipping away like water through a sieve, but the feeling remained. The soul-deep certainty that he'd been reaching for someone. That someone had pulled him back from an abyss he'd been falling into. That soft hands and a softer voice had been the only thing standing between him and complete annihilation. He looked at his hands in the pre-dawn darkness, at the scars across his knuckles from fights he remembered, and the one long pale line across his palm from a wound he didn't. They looked like weapons, like the instruments of violence they were. Like the things that had carved furrows into his shoulder. Vane was out of bed and dressed before conscious thought caught up with action. He didn't bother with his usual routine, didn't carefully construct the alpha mask he wore for the pack. He moved through the silent pack house like a storm front, his destination singular and absolute. Beta Vance lived in the North Wing with his daughter, their quarters modest despite his rank. Vane pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The Beta answered in sleep pants and a wrinkled shirt, his expression shifting from confusion to resignation in the space of a heartbeat. "Alpha, it's 5 a.m. Tell me what happened that night." Vane's voice came out rough, scraped raw from screaming in his sleep. "Tell me the truth, or so help me, Vance." "This isn't a conversation for the hallway." The Beta stepped aside reluctantly. "Come in." The small living space was warm, lived in, filled with the kind of comfortable clutter that spoke of actual life being lived rather than the sterile perfection of Vane's own quarters. Photos on the walls showed Jay at various ages, always unsmiling, but with her father's arm around her shoulders, his love evident in every frame. Vane felt like an intruder, like a monster that had tracked mud and blood into a sanctuary. "I'm remembering," he said without preamble. "Not everything, just pieces, but enough to know." His hands clenched into fists. "It was me, wasn't it? I'm the one who hurt her." Vance's jaw tightened. "You need to let this go." "Tell me." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" Vane took a step forward, his alpha presence flooding the room like pressure before a storm. "Your loyalty is to this pack, to me, and I'm giving you a direct order. Tell me what I did to your daughter." "My loyalty is to this pack," Vance agreed, his own power rising to meet Vane's challenge. "Which is exactly why I won't tell you, because what you're asking for will destroy you, and this pack needs you whole." "I'm not whole now," the words erupted from somewhere deep and jagged. "I wake up with blood on my hands that I can't account for. I watch her flinch and hide and suffer in silence, knowing that I'm the cause. How is that whole?" "You were poisoned." Vance's voice dropped, edged with something dangerous. "You were dying, and the feral state was the only thing keeping you alive long enough to fight it off. What happened that night wasn't your fault." "But I still did it." Vane could feel his control fracturing. "I still put my claws in her. I still hurt her badly enough that she can't even speak anymore. And you expect me to just, what? Pretend it didn't happen, move on." "I expect you to trust that some truths cause more damage than the lies that cover them." "Trust?" Vane laughed, bitter and broken. "You've been lying to me for 3 years. You sealed medical records. You kept your own daughter invisible to protect me from myself. Where's the trust in that?" Vance's control snapped. He surged forward, grabbing Vane's shirt, and suddenly they were chest to chest, two dominant wolves on the edge of violence. I kept her invisible to protect her from you, from the guilt that would eat you alive if you knew, from the investigation that would expose what she sacrificed. What she sacrificed, Vane shoved back. She didn't sacrifice anything, I took it from her. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. They were circling now, the small living room suddenly too cramped, too volatile. Vane's wolf was snarling just beneath his skin, demanding submission from the lesser wolf who dared challenge him. Vance's wolf was baring teeth back, a father protecting his child even from his own alpha. The door to the hallway burst open. Je threw herself between them with the kind of reckless desperation that overrode survival instinct. She was still in her sleep clothes, her hair loose around her shoulders, and she placed one small hand on each of their chests, pushing them apart with a strength that had nothing to do with physical power. Time stopped. Vane's wolf went absolutely still, because he'd seen this before, felt this before. Small hands pushing against his chest, trying to create distance, trying to protect. Not me, he realized with crushing clarity. She was never trying to protect herself. She was trying to protect someone else. The memory came in a rush, just small frame between him and a doorway. The nursery. His niece's scent, sharp with child fear, coming from behind the door Je was blocking with her body. The rogues had been a distraction. The real target was through that door, and Je had made herself a wall. She'd let him tear her apart rather than let him reach the children. Oh God! The words fell from Vane's lips like stones. He looked at Je's hand on his chest, at the way she was still protecting, still throwing herself into the line of fire even now. You weren't trying to calm me down. You were trying to stop me. Je's eyes went wide with panic. She wasn't a victim who got caught in the crossfire. Vane looked at Vance, seeing the truth written in the beta's anguished expression. She put herself there deliberately. She knew what I'd do to her, and she did it anyway. Alpha, Vance started. But Vane was looking at Je, at the scars hidden beneath her sleep shirt, at the terror in her eyes that wasn't fear of him but fear for him. Fear of what this knowledge would do to him. The voice in my dream, he said hoarsely. The singing, that was you, wasn't it? You were trying to bring me back while I was. Je's hand on his chest curled into a fist, clutching his shirt like an anchor. Her mouth opened, and for a moment Vane thought she might speak, might finally give voice to the truth that had been choking her for 3 years. Instead, she shook her head frantically, signed something desperate to her father, tried to pull away. Vane caught her wrist, gently, so gently, terrified of causing more damage. Don't run from this. Please, I need to understand. But Je was already tearing free, already fleeing back to her room, leaving Vane and her father standing in the wreckage of a confrontation that had answered everything and nothing. She saved my life, Vane said into the terrible silence, and I nearly killed her for it. Vance's shoulders sagged. Now you know, so what are you going to do with that truth, Alpha? Vane didn't have an answer. He only knew that the ghost he'd been hunting had a face now, and it was his own, 3 years younger, poisoned, feral, and tearing apart the bravest wolf he'd ever known. The pack gathering was supposed to be a celebration. The autumn harvest had been good, the territory secure, the pack thriving under the Iron Wreath's rigid leadership. Vane attended because it was expected, standing at the edge of the great hall with a glass of whiskey he wasn't drinking, watching his pack laugh and dance, and pretend they didn't notice their alpha's hollowed-out expression. 3 days since the confrontation with Vance. 3 days of Je avoiding him with the skill of someone who'd spent years perfecting invisibility. 3 days of Vane drowning in fragments of memory that grew sharper each time he closed his eyes. The music started as background noise, fiddles and drums, the kind of lively folk songs that got the younger wolves dancing. Vane tolerated it with gritted teeth, his mind elsewhere, trapped in a loop of small hands and desperate singing and blood that wouldn't wash away no matter how many times he scrubbed his palms raw. Then the tempo changed. Someone old Marcus with his weathered guitar began playing a melody that turned Vane's blood to ice water. Slow, haunting, built on minor chords that seemed to echo from some deep ancestral memory. A lullaby. The kind pack mothers sang to pups during the dark months, when winter felt endless and the wolves howled their loneliness to an uncaring moon. Vane's wolf surged forward so violently he nearly shifted right there in the great hall. His glass slipped from numb fingers, shattering against the floor, but the sound was distant, meaningless. All he could hear was that melody wrapping around his brainstem, dragging up sensations that had no words attached, warmth in the midst of cold, light in overwhelming darkness, an anchor when everything was chaos and teeth and blood. Come back, I know you're still in there, come back. The voice in his memory was singing that song. Vane's eyes swept the great hall with predatory focus. Couples dancing. Groups clustered near the food tables. The band in the corner. But no, she'd been here earlier. He'd caught glimpses of her helping serve drinks, moving through the crowd like smoke. But now she was gone. He knew where she'd be. The kitchen was dark except for the moonlight streaming through the high windows. Empty of the daytime chaos, it felt cavernous, almost sacred. And there, silhouetted against the silver light, stood Jo with her arms wrapped around herself, swaying slightly to music only she could hear. She was humming. The same melody. The same achingly familiar tune that had reached into Vane's chest and squeezed his heart until he couldn't breathe. Where did you learn that song? Jo spun, her humming cutting off with a sharp intake of breath. Even in the dim light, Vane could see the guilt flash across her face, the look of someone caught doing something forbidden. He moved closer, drawn by something beyond conscious choice. That song, the one you're humming, where did you learn it? Jo's hands moved in frantic signs, but Vane was done accepting silence as an answer. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides and caught her hands in his, stilling the desperate gestures. I don't understand your signs, he said, his voice rough. But I need you to try. Please, Jo. That song is in my head, in my nightmares, and I don't know why. I don't know. His grip tightened reflexively before he forced himself to gentle. Help me understand. For a long moment, Jo just stared at their joined hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She pulled one hand free and pressed it over her heart, then made a rocking motion. Mother. Your mother taught you. Vane's throat was tight. The song was your mother's. Jo nodded. Her hands moved again, a gesture like soothing, like calming, then a sign that looked like claws or maybe a wolf. Vane watched, trying to piece together meaning from movement. She taught you to calm wolves, he guessed. Another nod. Jo's fingers trembled as she signed something more complex, something that involved pointing at him, at herself, at the space between them. Vane caught fragments. Scared, safe, remember. You've used it on me, he realized. When? Jo bit her lip, and Vane could see the war happening behind her eyes. The desperate need to maintain the walls crumbling against 3 years of carrying secrets, too heavy for one person to bear. Then she opened her mouth, and sound emerged. Broken, rusty, barely above a whisper, but sound. When you lose control. Vane's world tilted. Her voice was nothing like he'd imagined. Soft and rough at the same time, like silk dragged across stone. The voice from his nightmares, the one singing through blood and chaos. You can speak. The observation was stupid, obvious, but his brain was struggling to process. Sometimes, the word came out pained, like something physical being dragged from her throat. When it matters. How long? Vane asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. How long have you been watching me, using that song when my control slips? Jo's eyes closed. When they opened again, they held a resignation that looked like surrender. Her hands moved through signs more slowly now, and Vane found himself understanding through context, through the raw honesty in her expression. 3 years. Since that night. I see it happening. The way your hands shake when you're angry, the way your eyes go distant when someone mentions the attack, the way your wolf rises too close to the surface. And I sing, quietly, where you can't quite hear but your wolf can. You've been protecting me. Vane's voice broke on the realization. All this time I thought you were afraid of me, but you were protecting me, from myself. A single tear escaped down Jo's cheek. She nodded. Why? The question was raw, scraped clean of pretense. After what I did to you, why would you? Je pulled her hand free from his grip and reached up, her palm hovering just shy of his face. The same gesture from his nightmare. The same heartbreaking courage of someone touching something that could kill them. Because, she whispered, her voice cracking, the beast isn't you. The beast is the poison, the rage, the thing that tried to make you into a weapon. But you... Her fingers finally made contact, feather-light against his jaw. You fought so hard to come back. I saw it, felt it. You were screaming inside your own mind, trying to stop, and when I sang. She trailed off, but Vane understood. The song had been a lifeline for both of them. Show me, he said hoarsely. Sing it again, please. Je's hand fell away. She looked at him like he'd asked her to tear out her own heart. Vane. Please. He'd never begged for anything in his life, but he was begging now. I need to hear it. I need to understand what you gave me. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. Then she drew a shaking breath, and the melody emerged, thin at first, uncertain but growing stronger with each note. The same lullaby from the Great Hall, but different in her voice. Personal, intimate, a song meant for one listener alone. Vane closed his eyes and let it wash over him. And with the music came memories, no longer fragments but a cohesive whole. Je kneeling before his feral form, so small she should have been nothing more than prey. Her voice never wavering even as his claws found her flesh. The way she'd kept singing through her own screams, kept the melody intact because she knew, somehow knew, that it was the only thing keeping him tethered to his humanity. She hadn't been trying to calm him down. She'd been trying to keep him from becoming something he could never come back from. When the last note faded, Vane opened his eyes to find Jo watching him with an expression that held too many emotions to name. You saved me, he said. Not just that night, every day since. You've been standing between me and the darkness, singing me back to myself, and I never even knew. I couldn't let you know. Her voice was barely audible. You would have, the guilt would have. Destroyed me, Vane finished. Your father was right, I would have broken completely. Yes. They stood in the moonlit kitchen, the music from the Great Hall a distant murmur, the weight of 3 years pressing down between them. Vane wanted to touch her, to pull her close. To promise that he'd spend the rest of his life making this right. But he didn't deserve to touch her, didn't deserve the gentle way she was looking at him now. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. Je's hands moved in a sign he was beginning to recognize. You can't. Some things stay broken. Then what do we do? She looked at him for a long moment, then placed her hand over his heart, the same gesture she'd made that first night, the one that had felt so familiar. This time, Vane understood what she was saying. We carry it together, or we don't carry it at all. The intimacy of it undid him completely. Vane's carefully constructed walls crumbled, and he reached for her without permission, pulling her against his chest and burying his face in her hair. She stiffened for a heartbeat, then melted into him, her small frame fitting against his like she'd been designed for this exact purpose. I'm so sorry, he whispered into the dark silk of her hair. I'm so goddamn sorry. Je's arms came up around him, and she held on like he was the one who needed anchoring. Maybe he was. Maybe they both were, two broken wolves clinging to each other in the ruins of a tragedy that had forged them into something neither of them understood yet. In the distance, the lullaby played on. The days after the gathering felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for someone to push. Vane found himself seeking Ja out with an intensity that bordered on obsession, drawn to her presence like gravity, like a moon pulled into orbit around something it couldn't escape. She was in the library when he found her on the third day, curled into one of the window seats with afternoon light turning her dark hair bronze. She'd been avoiding the kitchen since their conversation, as if the memory of what they'd shared there was too raw to revisit. Vane watched her from the doorway, memorizing the curve of her spine, the way her fingers traced the words on the page like she was reading Braille instead of text. She looked peaceful, almost content, right up until she sensed his presence and that fragile calm shattered into wariness. Don't, he said softly. Don't put the walls back up, not after. After what? The words emerged rough, unpracticed. She was speaking more now, though each word still seemed to cost her something. After you held me, she stopped, her throat working. This is dangerous, Vane. I know. He moved into the library, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The sound felt significant, like sealing them into a confession booth. I can't stay away from you. I've tried. You should try harder. But she didn't move from the window seat, didn't run, even as he crossed to where she sat. Why? Vane braced his hands on either side of her, caging her against the window without touching. Close enough to feel her warmth, to smell the lavender soap she used, to see the pulse hammering in her throat. Give me one good reason why I should walk away from the only person who's ever. He stopped, uncertain how to finish that sentence. The only person who'd ever seen him at his worst and stayed. The only person who'd sacrificed herself for him without asking for anything in return. The only person whose presence made him feel simultaneously more human and more monstrous. Because you don't know what you're asking for. Zha's voice was barely a whisper. Her eyes were fixed on his chest, refusing to meet his gaze. You think you want this, but you don't understand. Then make me understand. Vane shifted closer, one hand coming up to cup her jaw, tilting her face toward his. Stop protecting me from the truth. Stop protecting me from myself. Just talk to me, please. Her skin was silk under his palm. She leaned into his touch for just a moment before catching herself, and that small surrender did something devastating to his restraint. I can't give you what you want, Zha said, but her hand came up to rest against his chest over his heart, and she didn't push him away. I can't be. Why do you look at me like that? The question tore out of him, raw and bleeding. Like you're seeing a ghost, like I'm something that haunts you. Zha's eyes finally met his, and what he saw there stole his breath. Not fear, not horror. Something infinitely more complicated, grief and longing and a sorrow so deep it had its own gravity. Because you are, she whispered. You haunt every moment of every day. You're the nightmare I can't wake up from and the dream I'm terrified of losing. The confession hung between them like smoke. Vane's thumb traced the line of her jaw, cataloging the delicate bone structure, the softness of her skin, the way she trembled under his touch but didn't pull away. I don't understand how you can look at me with anything but hatred. His voice cracked. After what I did to you. You didn't do anything. Zha's hand fisted in his shirt, holding him in place even as every word seemed to cut her. The poison did, the rage did, but you, the you that's standing here right now, you fought it. You came back. You. She stopped, tears spilling over, and Vane felt something break apart in his chest. He'd made her cry. Was still making her cry, just by existing, by being the walking reminder of the worst night of her life. I should go, he said, even as everything in him screamed to stay. This isn't fair to you. Nothing about this is fair. Zha's other hand came up to frame his face, holding him with a gentleness he didn't deserve. But I stopped caring about fair 3 years ago when I decided you were worth saving. The words hit him like a physical blow. Worth saving. As if he'd ever been worth the price she'd paid. Zha. Don't. Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone, and Vane realized he was the one shaking now. Don't apologize again. Don't tell me you're not worth it. Don't. He kissed her. It wasn't a decision, wasn't a conscious choice. One moment there was air between them and the next there wasn't, and Vane was learning the shape of her mouth like it held the answers to questions he'd been asking his entire life. Zha made a sound, surprise or surrender or maybe both, and then she was kissing him back with a desperation that matched his own. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and Vane wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her from the window seat, pressing her against the wall beside it. The kiss tasted like salt and sorrow and 3 years of unspoken truth. It tasted like forgiveness he hadn't earned and grace he didn't deserve. It tasted like coming home to a place he'd burned to the ground and finding it had been rebuilt in his absence. Zha's legs wrapped around his waist, her small body fitting against his like they'd been designed for this, and Vane could feel her tears on his face, mixing with his own. They were both crying and neither of them could stop, the kiss turning into something that was more grief than passion, more confession than seduction. When they finally broke apart for air, Vane rested his forehead against hers, their breathing ragged and synchronized. "I'm sorry," he gasped. "God, Joe, I'm so—" "Stop apologizing." Her voice was wrecked, beautiful in its destruction. "Just stop. I shouldn't have, you're afraid of me, and I just—" The horror of what he'd done crashed over him. He'd pinned her against a wall, had kissed her without asking, had used his size and strength to trap someone who'd already been traumatized by his violence. "I'm exactly the monster you think I am." "No." His hands tightened in his hair, forcing him to look at her. Her eyes were red-rimmed and fierce. "You're not listening. I'm not afraid of you. I've never been afraid of you. You flinch when I'm near. You hide when I enter rooms. You—" "I flinch because touching you hurts," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength even as fresh tears fell. "Because every time I look at you, I remember what it felt like to hold you while you were dying inside your own skin. Because I see you trying so hard to be perfect, to never lose control, and I know it's my fault. The weight you carry, the fear, I put that there." "That's not—" Vane started, but Jo pressed her fingers to his lips. "Let me finish." She took a shaking breath. "I hide from you because I'm terrified you'll see the truth in my eyes, that you'll realize what I did, what I let happen, and you'll hate yourself even more than you already do. I'm not afraid you'll hurt me again, Vane. I'm afraid you'll hurt yourself when you finally understand what loving you has cost me." The word hung in the air between them, impossible and devastating. Loving. Vane's knees nearly buckled. He lowered Jo carefully back to the ground, but couldn't make himself let go completely. His hands stayed on her waist, anchoring or being anchored, he wasn't sure which. "You can't," he said hoarsely. "You can't love me, not after." "I know." Jo's laugh was broken and bitter and achingly sad. "Believe me, I know. I've tried not to. For 3 years I've tried. But you won't let me go, and I can't keep." She stopped, covering her face with her hands. "This has to stop, before we destroy each other." Vane pulled her hands down, needing to see her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you deserve the truth." Jo's expression was resigned, almost peaceful in its defeat. "All of it. Not fragments and hints and things I let you piece together. The whole story from beginning to end." "Jo." "Tomorrow." She pulled away from him, and this time Vane let her go even though it felt like tearing off his own skin. "Meet me in the forest at the old oak near the eastern border. Sunrise. I'll tell you everything." "Why not now?" "Because if I tell you now in this moment with you looking at me like that—" She touched her swollen lips, her expression crumbling. "I'll lose my nerve, and you need to know, before this goes any further, before we—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Vane watched her gather her book and slip past him, moving toward the door with the quiet grace that had kept her invisible for so long. She paused at the threshold, looking back at him with eyes that held entire universes of unspoken words. "The kiss wasn't a mistake," she said softly, "but everything after it will be if you don't know what you're choosing." Then she was gone, leaving Vane alone in the library with the ghost of her touch still burning on his lips, and the terrible certainty that tomorrow would change everything. He'd thought knowing the truth would free him. Now he was afraid it would destroy them both. Vane didn't sleep. He spent the night packing his office like a caged animal, watching the hours crawl towards sunrise with the kind of dread usually reserved for execution dates. The kiss haunted him, the taste of Jo's tears, the way she'd trembled in his arms, the word loving that had fallen from her lips like a confession and a curse all at once. At 4 a.m, there was a knock at his door. "Come in," Vane called, his voice rough from disuse. The young Omega who entered was barely 20, all nervous energy and downcast eyes. Riley, one of the pack's junior members who worked night security shifts. His scent was sharp with anxiety. "Alpha, I'm sorry to disturb you, but Riley twisted his hands together. "I heard you've been asking questions about the night of the attack, 3 years ago." Vane went very still. "You were there." "I was on my first solo night watch. I was supposed to be patrolling the South Wing, but I heard the fighting and the Omega's voice cracked. "I hid, in the supply closet near the nursery entrance. I was too scared to help, too scared to even call for backup. I hid like a coward. You were a child, Vane said, though his heart was hammering. You did what you needed to survive. What did you see? Riley looked up, his eyes haunted. I saw her, Beta Vance's daughter. She came running when the rogues were already dead, when you were still feral. You were standing over the bodies, covered in blood, and you were turning toward the nursery door, toward where the pups were hiding. The room tilted. Vane gripped the edge of his desk. What happened? She put herself between you and the door. She was so small, Alpha. I was sure you'd kill her in seconds, but she started singing. Riley's voice dropped to a whisper. This old lullaby like the one they played at the gathering. And you stopped. Stopped, Vane repeated numbly. You were fighting it. I could see it. Your claws kept extending and retracting, and you were shaking like you were being torn apart from the inside. And she just kept singing, kept kneeling there while you... Riley's composure broke. You hurt her so badly, Alpha. I could smell her blood from where I was hiding. But she never stopped singing. Never ran. She held your face in her hands and sang you back until you collapsed. The world was ending. That was the only explanation for the way reality was fracturing around the edges, turning everything sharp and wrong and impossible to process. Why didn't you tell anyone? Vane asked through numb lips. Beta Vance found me right after. He made me swear never to speak of it, said it would destroy you if you knew, and the pack needed you whole. But Riley's hands twisted tighter. I heard you've been tearing yourself apart trying to find out who hurt her, and I couldn't let you keep searching for an enemy that was you. I couldn't. Vane heard himself thank the Omega, heard himself dismiss him, watched the door close with the finality of a coffin lid. Then he was moving, his body operating on autopilot while his mind screamed in frequencies too high to process. He knew where she'd be, where she always was when the weight of the world got too heavy. The kitchen was dark save for the pre-dawn gray filtering through the windows. She stood at the industrial sink, washing dishes that didn't need washing, her movements mechanical and distant. She didn't turn when he entered, but her shoulders tensed with recognition. You weren't supposed to know yet, she said quietly. I was going to tell you, at sunrise, I had a whole speech prepared. Riley came to me. Vane's voice sounded hollow, echoing in his own ears. He told me what he saw. Tell me he's lying, please. Tell me it's not true. Her hands stilled in the soapy water. I can't. The simple words landed like a death sentence. You walked into that hallway knowing what I'd do to you. Vane was shaking now, his whole body trembling with the effort of staying upright. You knelt in front of a feral alpha covered in the blood of the wolves he'd just slaughtered, and you... He couldn't finish, couldn't voice the magnitude of what she'd done. The pups, Je said, her voice steady even as tears began sliding down her cheeks. Your niece was in that nursery, your nephew, 6 other children. The rogues were a distraction. The real assassin poisoned you and was waiting for you to kill your own family. I couldn't let that happen. So you let me kill you instead. The accusation was vicious, torn from somewhere primal and bleeding. I didn't die. You should have, the words exploded out of him. God, you should have died. Those wounds, Dr. Kess said they should have been fatal. You should have. But I didn't. She finally turned to face him, and the calm acceptance in her expression was somehow worse than tears. I held on because you needed me to, because if I died, you would have never forgiven yourself. You would have gone feral permanently, and the pack would have had to put you down. Vane's legs gave out. He caught himself on the counter, his breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted like panic. You were 17. 18, barely. You were a child. His voice broke. You were a child, and I tore you apart, and you've spent 3 years protecting me from the truth of what I did. What the poison did. Don't. Vane's hands fisted against the cold steel. Don't make excuses for me. Don't try to separate the beast from the man. My claws, my strength, my lack of control. It doesn't matter what caused it. I'm the one who hurt you. She moved closer, her wet hands reaching for him, but Vane jerked back like she'd burned him. Don't touch me, he gasped. Please, don't, I can't. Vane. You said you loved me. The accusation tasted like bile. How can you love someone who did that to you? How can you stand to be in the same room with me, let alone? He touched his lips, remembering the kiss, and felt sick. Yesterday, I kissed you. I put my hands on you, after what I did. You didn't know. That doesn't make it better. The shout echoed through the empty kitchen. That makes it worse. I've been so focused on finding your attacker, so righteous in my fury, and the whole time it was me. The monster you've been protecting everyone from was me. Je was crying openly now, her composure finally cracking. You're not a monster. You were poisoned. You were dying. You fought so hard, Vane. I felt it. The way you were struggling against the feral state, trying to hold on to who you were. That's why I knew the song would work, because you were still in there fighting. I nearly killed you while I was fighting. Vane's laugh was broken and bitter. Do you have any idea what that means? What it makes me? It makes you someone who survived something that should have killed you. Je took a step forward, and this time when Vane tried to back away, he was already against the wall. It makes you someone who came back from the edge when every instinct was screaming at you to let go. You think you're a monster. Monsters don't fight their own nature. Monsters don't come back. But you did, for me, for the pups, for yourself. Stop trying to make me the hero of this story. Vane said desperately. I'm not the one who walked into hell to save innocent lives. I'm the one who created the hell in the first place. You were a victim. You were the victim. The words were a roar that made Je flinch, and Vane hated himself for it. He forced his voice lower, though it shook with barely controlled anguish. You, a girl who should have been safe in her own home, who should have been protected by her alpha. Instead, that alpha tore her apart and left her so broken she couldn't even speak for 3 years. I chose not to speak, Je said quietly. That wasn't you. That was me, deciding that silence was safer than the truth. Because of what I did to you. Because of what the truth would do to you. She was close enough to touch now, her hand hovering near his face in that achingly familiar gesture. I watched you after that night, saw how you drove yourself to be perfect, to never lose control, to be worthy of the second chance you'd been given. And I knew, if you remembered what happened, if you knew the price that was paid, you'd destroy yourself trying to make amends for something that wasn't your fault. Vane caught her wrist before her hand could make contact, his grip gentle but immovable. How is it not my fault? My claws, my rage, my... The assassin's poison, she interrupted. The conspirators' plan, the rogues who invaded our home. You want to claim responsibility. Fine, but claim all of it. Claim the part where you fought through enough toxin to kill 3 wolves. Claim the part where you heard my voice and came back when you could have just let go. Claim the part where you've spent 3 years trying to be the kind of alpha worth following, even though the guilt of that night has been eating you alive. I don't deserve. Neither did I, her voice cracked. I didn't deserve to be torn apart, didn't deserve to lose my voice, my place in the pack, my father's peace of mind. But it happened anyway. And we both have a choice. We can let that night define us forever, or we can decide that surviving it means something. Vane stared at her, at the tears tracking down her cheeks, at the scars hidden beneath her clothes that he'd put there with his own hands. At the girl who'd loved him enough to walk into her own death, and the woman who loved him still despite every reason not to. I can't do this, he whispered. I can't look at you without seeing what I did. I can't touch you without wondering if I'm hurting you. I can't. His voice broke completely. I can't be what you need me to be. Something died in Je's expression. Her hand fell away, and she took a step back, then another. Then I guess we're both broken, she said softly, and neither of us knows how to fix it. She turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Vane alone with the dawn light and the crushing weight of a truth that had finally, catastrophically, been laid bare. Vane didn't emerge from his quarters for 2 days. He told himself it was strategic withdrawal, giving the pack space, giving Je space, giving himself time to process the magnitude of what he'd learned. But the truth was simpler and more pathetic. He was hiding. From his responsibilities, from his pack, from the girl whose blood he could still feel on his hands even though he'd scrubbed them raw. The Ironwreath pack began to fracture in his absence. Beta Vance tried to maintain order, but whispers spread like infection through the pack house. The Alpha was unstable. The alpha was broken. The alpha had locked himself away and wouldn't see anyone, not even his second in command. By the third day, Vane could hear the arguments through his door, pack members demanding answers, others defending his right to privacy, everyone growing more anxious as the hours stretched on without leadership. He didn't care, couldn't care. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Jeanne kneeling before his feral form, her small hands reaching for his bloodied muzzle, her voice never faltering even as his claws tore through flesh and muscle and bone. He heard Riley's words on repeat. She never stopped singing, never ran. She'd been 18 years old, barely more than a child, and she'd walked into certain death because Vane had been too weak to fight off a poison, too dangerous to be trusted, too broken to protect the people who depended on him. On the fourth morning, Dr. Kess bypassed his locked door entirely by coming through the window. "Get up," the healer said without preamble, landing in his room with surprising grace for a woman her age. "Your pack is falling apart, and you're lying here wallowing in guilt like it's a luxury you can afford." Vane didn't move from where he lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. "Leave me alone." "No." Kess crossed to the windows and yanked open the curtains, flooding the room with harsh daylight. Vane hissed and turned away. "You want to feel guilty? Fine, feel guilty. But do it while you're actually leading your pack, not hiding like a coward." "I'm not hiding." "You're absolutely hiding." The healer's voice was sharp enough to cut. "You discovered that you hurt someone you care about, and instead of dealing with it like an adult, you've locked yourself away and left everyone else to pick up the pieces. Do you have any idea what this is doing to Ja?" Vane's chest constricted. "She's better off without me near her." "Is that what she told you?" Kess's expression softened slightly. "Because the girl I've been treating for panic attacks every night since your confrontation seems to disagree." He sat up so fast his vision swam. "What?" "She's barely sleeping, barely eating. She's convinced this is her fault, that she should have told you differently, should have prepared you better, should have." Kess shook her head. "She's destroying herself trying to figure out how to fix you, Vane, just like she did 3 years ago." The words landed like physical blows. "I never asked her to." "Of course you didn't. She did it anyway, because that's who she is, someone who sees broken things and tries to hold them together even at the cost of her own well-being." The healer moved closer, her expression stern. "But here's what you need to understand. You don't get to make this decision for her. You don't get to decide that she's better off without you, or that your guilt is more important than her voice in this. She chose to save you 3 years ago. She's choosing to stand by you now. The least you can do is respect that choice instead of treating her like another victim who needs protecting from yourself." "I did victimize her," Vane said hoarsely. "I tore her apart." "The poison tore her apart. You fought your way back to save her life." Kess sat on the edge of the bed, her voice gentling. "I was there in the aftermath, Vane. I saw what happened when you finally came back to yourself. Do you know what you did the moment you regained consciousness?" He shook his head, afraid to hope and terrified to know. "You crawled to where she was lying, bleeding out on the floor. You put pressure on her wounds with your bare hands, even though you were dying yourself from the poison. You howled for help loud enough to wake the entire pack. And when I arrived, you were singing to her." Kess's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "The same lullaby she'd used on you. You were trying to keep her conscious, trying to bring her back the way she'd brought you back. You didn't give up on her, Vane, not for a second." The memory was there, suddenly sharp and devastating, just pale face, her blood soaking through his fingers, the melody falling from his lips in a desperate prayer. "Please, please don't leave, please stay." "I remember," he whispered. "I remember holding her, begging her not to die." "Then you remember that the moment you came back to yourself, your first instinct was to save her, not to run, not to hide from what you'd done, but to fix it no matter the cost." Kess stood, brushing off her hands. "That's who you are, Vane, not the poisoned beast who hurt her, but the man who fought his way back and refused to let her go. Stop punishing yourself for the first part and start honoring the second." She moved toward the window, then paused. "The pack is gathering in the Great Hall tonight. They're demanding answers about your absence, about the investigation, about what's happening with their alpha. You can either show up and lead them, or you can stay here and let this pack tear itself apart. Your choice." Then she was gone, leaving Vane alone with memories that were finally, painfully complete. He'd hurt Ja. That truth was inescapable, carved into her skin in marks that would never fully fade. But he'd also saved her, had fought through his own dying to make sure she lived, had given her his blood when hers was soaking into the floorboards, had breathed for her when her lungs had filled with fluid, had refused to let her slip away even when every healer had said it was too late. The full picture was more complicated than just monster or hero. He was both, had always been both. The question was which one he chose to let define him. Vane stood, his legs shaky from days of disuse. He moved to the mirror and saw a stranger looking back, hollow-eyed, unshaven, haunted. The unbroken king, thoroughly broken. But maybe that was the point. Maybe being unbroken wasn't about never shattering. Maybe it was about gathering up the pieces and rebuilding something stronger from the ruins. He showered, shaved, dressed in the formal alpha attire he wore for pack gatherings. Each action felt significant, like putting on armor piece by piece. When he finally looked at himself again, he saw someone who looked almost like a leader, almost like someone worth following. The walk to the Great Hall felt like walking to his own trial. The pack went silent when he entered. 70 pairs of eyes tracked his movement as he made his way to the raised platform where the Alpha traditionally stood to address his wolves. Beta Vance stood off to one side, his expression carefully neutral. Dr. Kess gave him a small nod from the crowd. And there, in the very back of the hall, barely visible in the shadows, Ja. She looked as wrecked as he felt, her eyes red-rimmed and shadowed, her frame somehow smaller than usual. Their eyes met across the distance, and Vane saw everything he needed to see, fear and hope and a love so deep it had its own gravity. She was still standing, still here, still choosing him even now. That had to mean something. Vane took a breath and began to speak. 3 years ago, this pack survived an attack that should have destroyed us. Rogues infiltrated our home. I was poisoned and went feral. People died. His voice was steady, each word carefully measured. But we survived because someone, a girl barely 18 years old, was brave enough to walk into hell and pull me back from the edge. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vane held up a hand for silence. I've spent these 3 years trying to be perfect, trying to be the kind of alpha who never loses control, who never shows weakness, who never fails his pack. I thought that was strength. I thought that was leadership. He paused, his eyes finding Ja's. I was wrong. The pack was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about what you do when you shatter. Leadership isn't about being perfect. It's about being honest with yourself, with your pack, with the people you've failed. Vane's voice cracked slightly. I failed someone 3 years ago. I hurt her in ways that can never be fully healed. And then I failed her again by hiding from the truth instead of facing it. He could see Ja's tears from across the hall, could feel the weight of the pack's attention, could sense the moment teetering on the edge of judgment or acceptance. I'm done hiding, Vane said quietly. From the truth, from my failures, from the parts of myself that terrify me. If this pack is going to follow me, it needs to be with full knowledge of who I am, not just the unbroken king, but the man who broke completely and is trying to figure out how to rebuild. He stepped down from the platform and walked through the silent crowd, his destination singular and absolute. Ja's eyes went wide as he approached, and for a moment he thought she might run. Instead, she stood perfectly still as he knelt before her, the alpha kneeling before the lowest-ranked member of his pack, and offered his hand. I don't know how to fix what I broke, Vane said, his voice for her alone even though everyone was watching. But I want to try, if you'll let me. Ja looked at his outstretched hand like it was a lifeline and a trap all at once. Then, slowly, she placed her scarred palm against his and let him help her to her feet. The pack erupted in whispers, but Vane ignored them all. He had eyes only for the girl who'd saved him, who'd loved him, who was giving him one more chance he didn't deserve. Together, he asked quietly. Ja's fingers tightened around his. Together, she whispered back. And for the first time in 4 days, Vane felt like he could breathe. The pack didn't know what to do with the truth. In the hours after Vane's confession, the great hall fractured into clusters of whispering wolves. Some looked at their alpha with new understanding. Others wore expressions of betrayal. How could he have hidden this? How could Beta Vance have kept it secret? Most just looked confused, trying to reconcile the story they'd believed for 3 years with this new, complicated reality. Vane stood on the platform with his hand still clasped in his, watching his pack splinter before his eyes. This was what he'd feared. This was why the truth had been buried. Not to protect him, but to protect the fragile unity that held the Iron Wreath together. This changes everything. The voice came from Marcus, one of the senior enforcers. His weathered face was grave. An alpha who can't control his wolf is a liability, if it happened once. It won't happen again, Vane said, but even he could hear the uncertainty in his voice. How can you know that? Another voice, female this time. Sarah, a mother of 3. How can any of us feel safe if our alpha could turn on us? The murmurs grew louder, more agitated. Vane felt his hand tighten in his, felt the weight of 70 pairs of eyes judging him and finding him wanting. He'd known this would happen, had known that honesty might cost him everything. Maybe he deserved to lose it all. He was poisoned. Beta Vance's voice cut through the growing chaos. The attack wasn't random. It was a targeted assassination attempt against Alpha Vane and his bloodline. The hall went quiet. Vance stepped forward, his expression grim. I've kept this information sealed because releasing it would have put the pack at risk. But if we're laying all truths bare tonight, then you deserve to know everything. Vane looked at his beta in surprise. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned. The rogues who attacked us 3 years ago were mercenaries, Vance continued. Hired by a faction within the Northern Coalition who wanted to destabilize our pack and claim our territory. The poison they used on Alpha Vane was called Wraith's Breath, a toxin specifically designed to induce permanent feral state in alpha wolves. A collective intake of breath rippled through the crowd. The plan was elegant, Vance said, his voice hard. Poison the alpha, wait for him to go feral and slaughter his own family. The pack would be forced to execute him, leaving us leaderless and vulnerable to takeover. The rogues were just a distraction. The real assassin was one of the mercenaries who escaped in the chaos. Vane's mind was reeling. He'd known there was poison, but this level of conspiracy. How do you know all this? Marcus demanded. Because I spent 3 years tracking down everyone involved. Vance's expression was fierce. I interrogated the survivors, followed the money trail, identified the faction responsible, and made sure they understood that any further attempts on this pack would result in total annihilation. He paused. The Northern Coalition doesn't even exist anymore. I saw to that personally. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Vane stared at his beta, his friend, and realized how much had been happening in the shadows while he'd been focused on being perfect. Vance had been fighting a war Vane hadn't even known existed. The point, Vance said, his eyes sweeping the crowd, is that what happened to Alpha Vane wasn't a failure of control. It was a deliberate attack by enemies who understood that the only way to destroy the Iron Wreath pack was to turn our greatest strength against us. And they almost succeeded. But they didn't. The voice was so quiet that at first, Vane thought he'd imagined it. Then just stepped forward, releasing his hand, and Vane realized with a jolt that she was going to speak. In front of the entire pack. The girl who'd been silent for 3 years was about to use her voice for him. They didn't succeed, Je repeated, louder this time, though her voice still shook. Because Alpha Vane fought the poison. I was there. I saw it. He was dying, and the feral state was the only thing keeping him alive, but even then, even when every instinct was screaming at him to kill, he fought it. Every eye in the hall was on her now. Je's hands were trembling, but she didn't stop. The rogues were all dead by the time I found him. He'd protected the pack house. But the poison was driving him toward the nursery, toward his family, toward finishing what the assassins had started. And when I put myself in his path, her voice cracked, but she pushed through. He tried to stop. I could feel it. Every time his claws. Every time he hurt me, he was trying to pull back, fighting something that should have been impossible to fight. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice grew stronger. I sang to him, a lullaby my mother taught me, and he heard me. Through the poison, through the rage, through everything that should have made him mindless, he heard me and he came back. Not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to hold onto his humanity when everything was trying to rip it away. Vane wanted to go to her, to pull her back, to stop her from exposing herself like this. But she was magnificent in her courage, and he couldn't bring himself to interrupt. The scars I carry aren't marks of his failure, Je continued, her hand moving unconsciously to her shoulder. They're marks of his strength, proof that even at his worst, even when he should have been lost completely, he fought for us, for the children sleeping in that nursery, for this pack, for the alpha he knew he needed to be. She turned to face Vane fully, her dark eyes bright with conviction. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. It's about accepting help when you need it. It's about trusting the people around you to catch you when you can't stand on your own. Her voice dropped to something softer, more intimate. Alpha Vane let me help him that night. Let himself be vulnerable enough to hear my voice when he could have just given in to the darkness. That's not weakness. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. The silence in the great hall was absolute. Then, slowly, Riley stepped forward, the young Omega who'd witnessed everything from his hiding place. She's telling the truth, Riley said quietly. I saw it happen. Alpha Vane was fighting himself so hard I thought he'd tear apart from the inside. And when she sang to him, when she gave him something to hold on to, he looked at Vane with tears in his eyes. You came back for her, Alpha, for all of us, even when it would have been easier to just let go. Marcus was next, the old enforcer's gruff voice gentler than Vane had ever heard it. I've served under 3 alphas. 2 of them never would have admitted weakness, never would have trusted anyone enough to show vulnerability. They're both dead now, killed by enemies who exploited the cracks they refused to acknowledge. He met Vane's eyes. You're the first alpha I've followed who's been strong enough to be honest about his limitations. That's the kind of leader worth following. One by one, pack members began stepping forward, sharing their own stories of times Vane had helped them, protected them, led them with fairness and strength, building a picture of leadership that was so much more than just the worst night of his life. Sarah, the mother who'd questioned his control, wiped her eyes. My daughter was in that nursery. She's 7 now, healthy, happy, alive because you and Je fought for her when you could have both just. Let it happen. She looked at Je with something like awe. Thank you for saving our alpha, for saving our children, for being brave enough to tell us the truth. The hall erupted in agreement, voices overlapping, wolves stepping forward to touch Je's shoulder, her hand, offering the kind of pack connection she'd been denied for 3 years. She looked overwhelmed, swaying slightly under the attention, and Vane moved instinctively to her side. But she didn't lean on him. Instead, she stood tall, accepting the gratitude and recognition with a quiet grace that took his breath away. Beta Vance moved to stand beside them both. The question before us isn't whether Alpha Vane is perfect. He's not. None of us are. The question is whether we trust him to lead us, not despite his scars, but because of them. Because he understands what it means to fall and get back up. Because he's proven that he'll fight for this pack even when that fight is against himself. Marcus raised his fist in the traditional gesture of pack loyalty. The Iron Wreath stands with our alpha. One by one, fists rose throughout the hall, some faster than others, some with reservations still visible in their eyes, but rising nonetheless because leadership built on truth was stronger than perfection built on lies. Vane looked at his pack, his broken, beautiful, complicated pack, and felt something ease in his chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acceptance, the understanding that he didn't have to be unbroken to be worthy of leading them. He just had to be willing to be honest about the breaks. Je's hand found his again, and this time when Vane squeezed back, it felt less like holding onto a lifeline and more like sharing an anchor. 2 wolves who'd survived the same storm, learning to trust that the ground beneath them might finally hold. The pack gathering didn't end with speeches and raised fists. It ended with work. Vane spent the next week rebuilding what his absence had fractured, resolving disputes, reinforcing patrol schedules, meeting with every pack member who had concerns about his leadership. He was different now, and everyone could sense it. Less rigid, more willing to admit when he didn't have answers, more likely to ask for input instead of issuing commands from on high. The unbroken king had been replaced by something more sustainable, a leader who understood that strength came from community, not isolation. But there was one conversation he'd been avoiding, one question he hadn't yet asked. He found Jo in the garden behind the pack house, tending to the herb beds that supplied the kitchen. She'd taken to spending time outside now, as if 3 years of hiding in shadows had left her hungry for sunlight. She looked up when his shadow fell across her work, and something passed between them, acknowledgement, understanding, the weight of everything said and unsaid. "Walk with me," Vane asked. She set down her gardening tools and rose, brushing dirt from her hands. They walked in silence through the pack grounds, past the training fields and the children's play area, until they reached the small clearing where the Ironwreath's memorial stood. A circle of stones, each one bearing the name of a pack member lost to violence or time. 3 new stones had been added 3 years ago. The rogues had killed 3 wolves before Vane had stopped them, 2 enforcers and 1 healer's apprentice. Names he'd memorized. Guilt he carried like stones in his chest. "I come here sometimes," Vane said quietly, "to remind myself what failure costs. That's not what this place is for." J's voice was stronger now, each word coming easier than the last. "It's not about failure. It's about remembering, honoring, making sure their sacrifice meant something." "Did it?" Vane looked at the stones. "Mean something." "We're still here," J said simply. "The pack survived. The children are safe. That means something." Vane turned to face her fully. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." J waited, her dark eyes steady. "That night in the Great Hall when you spoke for me, when you told the pack I fought the poison," he struggled for words. "Did you mean it, or were you just trying to save me again?" "I meant every word." No hesitation, no doubt. "You did fight, Vane. I felt it. Every time you pulled back, every time you tried to stop, I felt your will battling the poison. Most wolves would have surrendered to the feral state. It would have been easier. But you didn't. I still hurt you." Yes, she didn't flinch from the truth. "But you also saved me, sang to me, kept me alive when I should have bled out. The scars you gave me, you also healed. That matters too." Vane reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I want you to stand with me, not as someone I'm protecting, not as a victim I'm making amends to, but as," he paused, searching for the right words, "as my equal, as someone whose strength I respect and whose voice I need to hear." His breath caught. "Vane." "I'm not asking you to be my mate," he clarified quickly, though the thought had crossed his mind more times than he could count. "Not yet. We both have healing to do, and that takes time. But I'm asking you to stand beside me publicly, to be recognized for what you are, one of the bravest wolves in this pack, to stop hiding in kitchens and corners and let yourself be seen." Tears welled in J's eyes. "I don't know if I can." "You already did," Vane reminded her gently. "In the Great Hall. You stood before 70 wolves and told them the truth. That's the hardest part. Everything else is just practice." She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "Just practice." "Well, maybe not just, but you won't be alone." Vane squeezed her hand. "I'll be right there, probably making mistakes and needing you to remind me that perfection isn't the goal." Je looked at him for a long moment, and Vane could see the war happening behind her eyes. Fear and hope, and the tentative possibility that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to take up space in the world. "Okay," she whispered finally. "I'll try. That's all I'm asking." They stood together in the memorial clearing as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, 2 wolves learning to carry their shared history as something other than a burden. The formal ceremony happened 3 days later. The entire pack assembled in the Great Hall, but this time the atmosphere was celebratory rather than tense. Vane stood on the platform in his ceremonial alpha attire, dark formal, where with the Ironwreath symbol embroidered in silver thread. A crown of iron thorns rested on a velvet cushion beside him, the pack's symbol of leadership. Je stood at the base of the platform in a dress the color of midnight, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time in years. She looked terrified and determined in equal measure. 3 years ago, Vane began, his voice carrying through the hall, this pack survived an attack that should have destroyed us. We survived because of courage, sacrifice, and a strength I didn't fully understand until recently. His eyes found Jez. I've asked you here today to witness me honoring that courage publicly, as I should have done years ago. He descended from the platform and held out his hand. Je took it, and together they climbed the steps until they stood side by side before the assembled pack. Javance saved my life and the lives of this pack's children by walking unarmed into the path of a feral alpha, Vane said. She paid a price that no one should have to pay, and she did it without hesitation, without expectation of reward, without anyone even knowing what she'd done. That kind of courage deserves recognition. He lifted the iron crown from its cushion and felt its familiar weight. But instead of placing it on his own head as tradition dictated, he held it between them. The Iron Wreath Pack's crown has always represented the burden of leadership, the pain and weight of protecting our own, but I think it should represent something else too. Vane looked at Ja, then at his pack. The understanding that those burdens are meant to be shared, that strength comes from letting others help carry the weight. He met Beta Vance's eyes and saw approval there, saw understanding. From this day forward, Vane continued, Javance stands as my acknowledged second, equal in voice and authority, not because of blood or rank, but because she's earned it through sacrifice and courage. When I speak, her voice carries the same weight. When I lead, she stands beside me, and when I fall, his voice roughened with emotion, she'll be there to sing me back as she's always been. The pack erupted in approval, fists raised in solidarity, voices raised in celebration. Je was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the recognition, by the acceptance, by the public acknowledgement of what she'd carried in silence for so long. Vane placed the iron crown on his own head, then took Je's hand and raised it high, presenting her to the pack as an equal. The gesture was symbolic but powerful, a public declaration that she was no longer invisible, no longer relegated to shadows and kitchens. She was seen, valued, home. Later, after the ceremony ended and the celebrations began, Vane found Jo in the kitchen. Some habits died hard, and she'd slipped away from the noise and crowd to the place that had always been her sanctuary. She stood at the same industrial sink where he'd first seen her scars, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was simply standing there, looking peaceful in a way he'd never seen before. You left your own celebration, Vane observed, leaning against the doorframe. It was loud, Je smiled slightly. I needed quiet. Mind if I join you? You're the alpha. You can do whatever you want. That's not what I asked. Vane moved closer. Do you want me here? Je turned to face him fully. Yes, I do. They stood in the moonlit kitchen, and Vane was struck by how much had changed since that first night. How different they both were. How the space between them had transformed from distance into intimacy. May I? He asked, gesturing toward her shoulder. Je nodded, and slowly, carefully, she slipped the sleeve of her dress down to reveal the scars. They looked different in the moonlight, silver against her skin, like lightning strikes frozen in time. Vane traced them with gentle fingers, following each raised line from her neck to her spine. These are the marks of the bravest wolf I've ever known, he said quietly. Je's hand came up to cover his, stilling his exploration. They're the marks of what we survived together. The words hung between them, transforming the scars from a symbol of trauma into something else. Evidence of survival, proof of strength, a shared history written in skin and sorrow and second chances. Together, Vane repeated, the word feeling like a promise. Together, Je confirmed. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to each scar, gentle, reverent, a benediction rather than an apology. Je's breath hitched, but she didn't pull away. When he finally straightened, her eyes were bright with tears that looked like healing. The Iron Wreath Pack, Je said softly, has always worn its crown of thorns with pride. Pain endured alone. Not anymore. Vane pulled her close, and she came willingly, fitting against him like she'd been designed for this exact purpose. Now it's something different, something better. What's that? Wounds shared and healed together. Vane rested his chin on top of her head, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. Burdens carried by two instead of one. Strength built from vulnerability instead of isolation. His arms wrapped around his waist, holding him with a fierceness that spoke of 3 years of wanting and waiting and wondering if this moment would ever come. "I love you," she whispered into his chest. "I've loved you since the moment you came back to yourself and sang my mother's lullaby. Since you fought your way through dying to make sure I lived. I love you, and I'm tired of being afraid to say it." Vane's throat tightened with emotion. "I love you too. I don't know when it started, maybe in that kitchen weeks ago, maybe 3 years ago when your voice pulled me back from darkness, but I love you. Scars and all, broken pieces and all, everything you are." They stood together in the quiet kitchen, two wolves who'd survived impossible odds, learning that love built from truth was stronger than anything built on perfection. The iron crown rested on Vane's head, but the real weight, the real strength, came from the girl in his arms who taught him that falling wasn't failure. Getting back up was everything. And doing it together made all the difference. Two broken wolves, one impossible love, a truth that could destroy them or forge them into something unbreakable. If this story moved you, subscribe for more tales of love born from darkness and strength forged in fire. Thank you, and I will see you in my next story.